I still remember how it all started that Sunday afternoon in April. The warm spring breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and barbecue through our backyard in suburban Philadelphia. Blue and pink balloons swayed gently from the pergola my husband James had built just last summer. Friends and family mingled around tables adorned with baby-themed decorations that had cost me weeks of planning and more money than I care to admit. 5 more minutes, everyone! I called out, my voice barely containing the excitement that had been building for the past 20 weeks. 20 long weeks of morning sickness, strange cravings, and the indescribable joy of feeling our baby's first movements. After 2 years of trying, countless negative pregnancy tests, and one devastating miscarriage, we were finally here, about to reveal the gender of our miracle baby. I caught James's eye across the yard. He was manning the grill, spatula in one hand, beer in the other, laughing at something my brother had said. At 34, with his dark hair slightly receding and laugh lines deepening around his eyes, he looked more handsome to me than he had on our wedding day 8 years ago. My heart swelled. This was our moment, our dream. "You look beautiful," he mouthed when he caught me staring. I smoothed down my floral maternity dress, the one I'd splurged $175 on at Nordstrom just for this occasion. My hands lingered on my growing bump, our little secret hidden beneath the fabric. Boy or girl, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that after everything we'd been through, we were finally going to be parents. "Are you nervous?" My best friend Melissa appeared at my side, handing me a glass of sparkling water with a lime wedge. She knew me well enough to have the drink ready just when I needed it. "Terrified," I admitted with a laugh, "but in the best possible way." "Well, I've got $20 on a boy," she winked. "Ryan's convinced it's a girl, though." I took a sip and scanned the crowd. Almost everyone we loved was here. My parents, who had driven up from Virginia, James's sister and her husband who'd flown in from Chicago, our friends from college, work, and the neighborhood. Even Dr. Patel, my OB-GYN who had guided us through our fertility journey, had stopped by with her husband. But my eyes finally landed on the one person whose presence made my stomach tighten with anxiety. Diana Williams, my mother-in-law, holding court on our patio furniture as if she'd paid for it herself. "She's been telling everyone she dreamt it was a boy," Melissa whispered, following my gaze. "Says she's never been wrong about these things." I forced a smile. "Well, we'll know soon enough." Diana caught my eye and waved imperiously, beckoning me over. At 62, she maintained the same sleek blonde bob she'd had for decades. Not a single grey hair visible thanks to her standing appointment at the most expensive salon in Center City. Her outfit, cream linen pants and a pastel blue blouse that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, was impeccable as always. "Elizabeth, darling," she called out in that syrupy voice that always seemed to contain a hint of criticism. "Come sit with me for a moment before the big reveal." Melissa squeezed my arm in silent support before I made my way across the lawn to where Diana sat, surrounded by her tennis friends whom she'd invited without asking. Just one of her many small boundary violations that had accumulated over the years. "You look tired," were the first words out of her mouth as I lowered myself carefully onto the cushion beside her. "Are you getting enough rest? James told me you're still working full-time. I don't think that's wise in your condition." 8 years of marriage to her son had taught me to choose my battles. "I'm feeling great, Diana. Just excited about today." She patted my hand in that condescending way of hers. "Of course you are, dear. Though I still think you should have let me host this at the country club. The facilities are much more appropriate for such an occasion." What she meant was that our modest 4-bedroom colonial in Bryn Mawr wasn't impressive enough for her social circle. Never mind that James and I had saved for 5 years to afford the down payment, or that I'd spent countless weekends painting and decorating to make it feel like home. "We wanted something intimate," I replied evenly. "Just family and close friends." Diana glanced meaningfully at the 40-plus people gathered in our backyard. "Yes, very intimate." I bit back a retort as James approached, saving me from having to respond. "Mum? Liz?" He smiled, oblivious to the tension. "The cake just arrived. I think we're about ready to start." Diana immediately brightened. "Oh, James! I was just telling Elizabeth how proud I am of both of you. She stood up and straightened his collar in a gesture that made him look 12 instead of 34. You're going to be such a wonderful father, just like your father was. James's face softened at the mention of his dad, who had passed away from a heart attack 3 years ago. It was Diana's trump card, one she played expertly whenever she wanted to manipulate emotions. Thanks, Mum, he said quietly. Let's get this show on the road, called out my father, camera already in hand. Dad, with his salt and pepper hair and perpetual tan from weekends spent fishing, could hardly contain his excitement about becoming a grandfather. James took my hand, helping me up. Ready to find out if we're having a football player or a ballerina? He whispered. I think either one could play football these days, I whispered back, making him laugh. We walked hand in hand to the centre of the yard, where a large black box decorated with question marks stood waiting. Inside was a bundle of helium balloons, either blue or pink, that would reveal our baby's gender. Only my sister knew the secret, having gotten the sealed envelope from Dr. Patel and arranged everything with the party store. My heart pounded as everyone gathered around us in a circle, phones raised to capture the moment. James's arm wrapped around my waist, his hand resting protectively on my bump. On the count of 3, my sister announced, grinning widely. 1! The crowd shouted together. James squeezed my hand. Whatever it is, I'm the happiest man alive, he whispered. 2! I blinked back tears of joy. After everything, the negative tests month after month, the fertility treatments, the miscarriage that had left us both hollow with grief, we were here, about to learn if our miracle baby was a boy or a girl. 3! James and I reached for the lid together, our fingers intertwining on the cardboard. With a shared look of anticipation, we lifted it open. A cloud of blue balloons erupted skyward. It's a boy! Someone screamed, and the yard erupted in cheers. A son. We were having a son. Blue balloons danced in the April sky as James turned to me, his eyes shining with tears. This was our moment, the culmination of years of hoping, praying, and persevering. I reached for him, wanting to feel his arms around me, to share this perfect moment of joy. But I never got the chance, because Diana Williams, my mother-in-law, did something I still can't believe when I think about it today. As the balloons floated upward and everyone cheered, she let out a shriek of delight and literally threw herself at James, cutting between us with surprising agility for a woman in her 60s. I knew it! I knew it would be a boy! She screamed, flinging her arms around her son and pulling him into a bear hug that physically pushed me aside. A grandson! James, you're giving me a grandson! I stumbled slightly, my pregnant belly throwing off my balance. My father, always watchful, steadied me with a hand on my elbow, his expression darkening as he witnessed Diana's behaviour. For a moment I stood there in shock, arms half raised for an embrace that wouldn't happen, watching as my mother-in-law sobbed dramatically against my husband's chest. He'll carry on the Williams name, she was saying. Just like your father wanted. James, caught off guard, patted his mother's back awkwardly while trying to reach for me with his other hand. But Diana was having none of it. She clung to him like a shipwreck survivor to a life raft, effectively blocking me, the actual pregnant woman, the mother of this child, from embracing my own husband in what should have been our moment. The yard had gone oddly quiet. I felt dozens of eyes on us, witnessing my humiliation. My cheeks burned as I slowly lowered my arms. Mum, James said, trying to disentangle himself. Mum, let me hug Liz. But Diana was lost in her performance, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief she'd somehow produced from her sleeve. I'm sorry, she sniffled loudly. I'm just so overcome. Richard would have been so proud. Another strategic invocation of James's dead father. The perfect moment, our perfect moment, was shattered. What should have been an intimate celebration between husband and wife had been hijacked and transformed into the Diana Williams show. Melissa appeared at my side, squeezing my hand in solidarity. That woman, she muttered under her breath. I forced a smile, determined not to let Diana ruin the entire day. It's fine, I whispered back, though we both knew it wasn't. By the time Diana finally released her death grip on James, the moment had passed. People were already moving toward the cake table, the excitement of the reveal giving way to the practical matter of dessert. James finally reached me, apology written all over his face. "I'm sorry," he murmured, finally pulling me into his arms. "You know how she gets—" I did know. This wasn't the first time Diana had inserted herself where she didn't belong, and something told me it wouldn't be the last, especially now that a grandchild was on the way. A grandson, specifically, which in Diana's outdated worldview was the ultimate prize. I leaned into James's embrace, trying to recapture some of the joy from moments earlier. "We're having a boy," I whispered against his chest. "We're having a boy," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. For a brief moment, as we stood there with his hands cradling my bump, I managed to push Diana from my mind. This baby, our son, was what mattered. Not her theatrics or boundary violations. But as James led me toward the cake table, I caught sight of Diana holding court again, accepting congratulations as if she were the one who had spent 20 weeks throwing up and growing a human being. "I just had a feeling," she was saying to anyone who would listen. "A grandmother knows these things." Something shifted inside me then. A hardening, a resolve forming. For too long I'd tolerated Diana's intrusions for James's sake. I'd smiled through her backhanded compliments, accepted her unsolicited advice, and overlooked her constant centering of herself in our lives. But this, hijacking one of the most precious moments of our journey to parenthood, this was different. As I watched her basking in attention that should have been ours, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Things needed to change before our son arrived. I just had no idea how difficult that change would be, or what it would cost us all. I didn't confront Diana that day. Instead, I cut the blue-filled cake, accepted congratulations, and played the role of glowing mother-to-be while something simmered inside me. A sense of injustice, yes, but also determination. This pattern couldn't continue once our son was born. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the kitchen was finally clean, I found James in the nursery, the room we'd deliberately left neutral until we knew the gender. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkened backyard where hours earlier our lives had changed. "We should paint it blue," he said when he heard me enter. "Not like bright blue. Maybe something more like slate or navy." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "I'd like that." He turned, and in the dim light from the hallway, I could see the happiness on his face. "A son, Liz. Can you believe it?" I placed my hands on my bump. "Honestly, I'm still processing it." James crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me, his hands joining mine over our growing child. "What should we name him?" "Not Richard," I said immediately, thinking of Diana's earlier performance. "I know your mum will push for it, but—" James sighed, his body tensing slightly at the mention of his mother. "I noticed what happened earlier," he said quietly. "With my mum during the reveal." I pulled back to look at his face. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed." "She practically tackled me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Liz. That wasn't fair to you." The validation loosened something in my chest. "It was supposed to be our moment," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I couldn't even hug you." James led me to the rocking chair we'd purchased the weekend before and gently guided me to sit. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "You're right. It was our moment. And my mum, she got carried away. She always gets carried away, James. And you always excuse it." He looked down at our joined hands. "She's been through a lot since Dad died." The familiar refrain, Diana's emotional trump card, played by proxy through her son. "It's been 3 years," I said carefully. "And I'm sympathetic, you know I am. But this pattern started long before your dad passed away." James was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? I wanted boundaries. I wanted respect. I wanted to raise our son without Diana's constant interference and emotional manipulation. I want you to talk to her, I said finally. Explain that what happened today wasn't okay, that there need to be clear boundaries once the baby comes. James nodded slowly. I'll talk to her. I promise. I believed him. James was a good man, kind, honest, hard-working. It wasn't his fault that he'd been raised by a woman who had spent his entire life teaching him that her feelings mattered above all else. Thank you, I whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. As we sat there in the half-finished nursery, planning the room where our son would sleep, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, James's conversation with Diana would be the turning point, that she would understand and respect the boundaries we needed to establish as new parents. I should have known better. Because what happened at our gender reveal party wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the beginning of Diana Williams's campaign to claim our son as her do-over baby, her second chance at motherhood. And the length she would go to achieve that goal would test not just my patience, but the very foundation of our marriage. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of James's voice drifting up from downstairs. Groggily, I reached for my phone. 8:17 a.m. Who could he be talking to so early on a Monday? I slipped out of bed, pulled on my robe and padded down the hallway. As I reached the top of the stairs, Diana's voice floated up, stopping me in my tracks. I've already ordered the crib, darling. Handcrafted from Italy, the same place that made your crib when you were a baby. Cost a fortune, of course, but nothing's too good for my grandson. I froze, my hand gripping the banister. What was she doing in our house at 8 in the morning? And why was she buying furniture for our nursery without even asking? Mom, that's really generous, but Liz and I already picked out a crib, James replied. His tone gentle but firm. We ordered it last week. Oh! The disappointment in Diana's voice was palpable even from upstairs. Well, I suppose you can cancel it. This one is heirloom quality, James. Your children's children could use it someday. I closed my eyes, counting backward from 10 as I'd learned in my prenatal yoga class. This was exactly the kind of thing I'd talked to James about last night. Diana making decisions about our child without consulting us, inserting herself where she didn't belong. Mum, we appreciate the thought, but we've already designed the nursery how we want it. James's voice had an edge to it now, edge to, our crib matches the rest of the furniture. The rest of the furniture? Diana sounded aghast. You're not using that cheap stuff from IKEA, are you? James, really, I raised you better than that. That was it. I wasn't going to hide upstairs while Diana criticised our choices in our own home. I descended the stairs, making sure my footsteps were audible. The conversation in the kitchen immediately hushed. When I entered, James was leaning against the counter, coffee mug in hand, looking uncomfortable. Diana sat at our kitchen island, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour, a spread of bakery items arranged on a platter before her. Good morning, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. This is a surprise. Diana turned, her face arranging itself into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elizabeth, there you are. I brought breakfast to celebrate yesterday's wonderful news. She gestured to the array of pastries. The almond croissants are from that French bakery in Rittenhouse Square. I had to drive 40 minutes in morning traffic, but nothing's too good for the mother of my grandson. The emphasis on my grandson didn't escape me. That's very thoughtful, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Though a call ahead would have been nice. Diana waved her hand dismissively. Oh, I knew you'd both be up. James always has to be at the office by 9, and I wanted to catch him before he left. I glanced at James, who had the decency to look sheepish. He worked as a financial analyst at a firm in Centre City, a job he enjoyed, but that came with long hours. Usually he was out the door by 7:30 a.m. I took the morning off, he explained. After the party yesterday, I thought I deserved a slow start. How wonderful, Diana beamed at her son. That means we have time to discuss the baby shower. I've been thinking it should be at the club, of course. I've already spoken to Marianne about reserving the ballroom for the first weekend in June. I nearly choked on my coffee. The baby shower? Yes, dear. We need to get invitations out soon if we want everyone to be able to attend. Diana, I said carefully, setting my mug down. Usually baby showers are planned by friends or family members of the mother. Melissa and my sister are already working on it. Diana's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, I'm family too, aren't I? And I have connections that your friends simply don't have. The club has a 3-month waiting list for events, but Marianne assured me she could squeeze us in as a personal favour. I looked to James for support, but he was suddenly very interested in a blueberry muffin. We were thinking of something more casual, I tried again. Maybe in my parents' backyard in Virginia. They have that beautiful garden and early summer would be perfect. Diana's laugh was like glass breaking. Virginia? Elizabeth, be reasonable. You can't expect people to drive 4 hours for a baby shower. My family would have to drive 4 hours to come here, I pointed out. Well, yes, but there are only, 5 of them, whereas here we have all of James's family, our friends from the club, my tennis group, the charity board. I could feel my blood pressure rising. This was exactly what I'd feared, Diana taking control of every aspect of our baby's life before he was even born. We haven't decided on a location yet, James finally interjected, stepping into the growing tension. And we don't need to figure it out this morning. Mum, didn't you say you had a hair appointment at 10? Diana checked her watch, a Cartier that had been a gift from her husband before he died. Oh. You're right. I should be going. She stood, gathering her designer handbag. But James, do think about the club. It would be so much more appropriate than a backyard. The way she said backyard made it sound like we'd suggested hosting the shower in a gas station bathroom. We'll think about it, James said non-committally, walking her to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to their muted conversation and the eventual sound of the front door closing. When James returned, his expression was apologetic. Before you say anything, he began. I didn't invite her over. She just showed up with breakfast. And you didn't think to mention our conversation from last night? About boundaries? James sighed, running a hand over his face. I was going to. But then she started talking about the crib and the shower, and it didn't seem like the right time. When will be the right time, James? After she's completely taken over our son's life? You're exaggerating, he said, though without much conviction. Am I? She's already buying furniture we didn't ask for and planning a shower without consulting us. What's next? Moving in to help after the baby's born? The look that flashed across James's face told me I'd hit closer to the mark than I realised. She mentioned that. Didn't she? I asked incredulously. She wants to move in when the baby comes? Not move in exactly, James hedged. She just suggested staying in the guest room for a few weeks to help out. Lots of new parents get help from family, Liz. I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling a headache forming. My mother offered to come stay with us too, but she asked first, and she said she'd stay at the hotel down the street if we wanted more privacy. Mum's just excited, James said, the familiar refrain. This is her first grandchild. It's our first child, James, ours, not hers. He approached me cautiously, placing his hands on my shoulders. I know that, and I'll talk to her, I promise. Just not today. She was so happy bringing breakfast and everything. I wanted to argue further, to make him understand how his mother's behaviour was already causing a rift between us, but I was tired and my back ached. And the thought of another confrontation made me want to crawl back into bed. Fine, I conceded. But soon, James, before this gets worse. He kissed my forehead. I will. I promise. But as the weeks passed and my belly grew, that promised conversation never seemed to happen. Instead, Diana's presence in our lives only increased. She began showing up unannounced 2 or 3 times a week, always with some gift or another for the baby. A hand-knitted blanket made from cashmere that cost more than our monthly car payment. A sterling silver rattle from Tiffany's. A collection of classic children's books with custom leather bindings. Each gift came with strings attached, an opinion about how we should raise our son, a criticism thinly veiled as advice, a story about how she'd done things when James was a baby. And with each visit, I watched my husband retreat further into the role of peacekeeper, unwilling or unable to establish the boundaries we so desperately needed. By the time May rolled around, Diana had indeed taken over the baby shower plans, steamrolling Melissa and my sister with her connections and checkbook. The invitations, thick cream cardstock with gold embossing, went out without my final approval, listing the Philadelphia Country Club as the venue and Diana Williams as the hostess. "I don't even know half these people," I told James one night, scrolling through the guest list Diana had finally deigned to share with me. "Who is Margot Whitfield, or the Abernathy family?" "Mum's friends from the club," James replied distractedly, his attention on his laptop where he was finishing some work from the office. "The Abernathys play mixed doubles with her on Sundays. Why are they coming to our baby shower?" James looked up, finally registering my distress. "Does it matter? It's just a party, Liz." "It matters because this isn't what I wanted. I wanted something intimate with people we actually know and care about. Not your mother's social climbing event." He closed his laptop with a sigh. "My mum put a lot of effort into planning this. Can't we just go along with it? For peace's sake." Peace's sake. The phrase hung in the air between us, a summation of our marriage's growing problem. James would do anything, sacrifice any boundary, overlook any slight, for the sake of keeping peace with his mother, and increasingly, I was expected to do the same. "Your mother is going to be in the delivery room when our son is born, if you don't start setting some boundaries," I said, only half joking. The flash of discomfort that crossed James's face made my stomach drop. "She asked about that, didn't she?" I realised with horror. James shifted uncomfortably. "She just mentioned that she was in the room when her sister had her baby last year. That's all." "And what did you tell her?" "Nothing. I didn't say anything either way." I stared at him, this man I'd loved for nearly a decade, suddenly feeling like I was looking at a stranger. "James, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother will not be in the delivery room when I give birth. That is a hard boundary, non-negotiable." "I know that," he said quickly. "Of course I know that." "Do you? Because you haven't seemed capable of communicating any boundaries to her so far." James's face hardened. "That's not fair, Liz. She's just excited about the baby." "No, what's not fair is watching my husband consistently prioritise his mother's feelings over his wife's. What's not fair is having to fight for a say in my own child's life before he's even born." We went to bed angry that night, backs turned to each other in silent protest. And as I lay there in the dark, feeling our son's restless movements inside me, I wondered how we'd gotten here. How the joy of our pregnancy had been so thoroughly corrupted by Diana's interference and James's inability to stand up to her. The baby shower, when it finally arrived in early June, was exactly as ostentatious as I'd feared. The country club ballroom was transformed into a blue wonderland, with elaborate flower arrangements, a champagne fountain, along with a smaller, non-alcoholic one for me, and a dessert table that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. My mother, a practical woman who'd raised 3 children while working full-time as a nurse, looked thoroughly out of place among Diana's socialite friends. My father, never comfortable in settings like this to begin with, had begged off with a convenient summer cold. "It's all a bit much, isn't it?" my mother whispered as we surveyed the room together. "Diana certainly doesn't do anything by halves." "That's one way to put it," I replied, adjusting the maternity dress I'd been pressured into buying for the occasion. Another Diana selection that cost more than I'd ever spent on a piece of clothing. "Are you doing okay, sweetheart?" Mum asked, her eyes searching my face with the perception that only mothers have. "You seem strained." I considered brushing it off with a platitude about pregnancy being tiring, but the weight of the past few months suddenly felt too heavy to bear alone. "It's Diana," I admitted quietly. "She's taking over everything, Mum, and James won't stand up to her." My mother's face softened with understanding. "Ah, the mother-in-law problem, as old as marriage itself. Did you have trouble with Dad's mother?" Mum let out a small laugh. "Vivian! Lord, yes. That woman thought no one was good enough for her precious son, used to rearrange my kitchen cabinets when she came to visit, claiming she was helping." Despite everything, I smiled at the thought of my grandmother, who'd passed away when I was in college. How did you handle it? Not always gracefully, Mum admitted. There were tears, slammed doors, silent treatments. But eventually, your father and I figured out that we had to present a united front. He had to be the one to set boundaries with his mother, and I had to be the one to set them with mine. That's just it, I said, watching as Diana held court across the room, showing off the custom-made baby book she'd commissioned as a small gift for her grandson. James won't set boundaries. Every time I ask him to talk to her, he says he will, but then nothing changes. If anything, it gets worse. Mum squeezed my hand. Marriage is hard work, Elizabeth. Add a baby and a boundary-challenged mother-in-law to the mix, and you've got yourself a perfect storm. But remember, you and James created this child together. You're the parents. No one else gets to make decisions about your son unless you allow it. Try telling Diana that, I muttered. Oh, I plan to if she gives me an opening, Mom replied with a gleam in her eye that reminded me where I'd gotten my own streak of stubbornness. The shower proceeded with the military precision that characterized all of Diana's events. There were games, tasteful ones, Diana had assured me, nothing crass like diaper-changing contests, a catered lunch, and finally, the opening of gifts. I sat in an ornate chair that Diana had designated as the throne for the mother-to-be, while James stood beside me, dutifully recording each gift and giver for thank-you notes. Diana hovered nearby, often intercepting gifts to exclaim over them before passing them to me. Look at this beautiful silver frame, she gushed, holding up a gift from one of her tennis friends. Perfect for the baby's first portrait. I've already scheduled a session with Anton for the week after your due date. He's the most sought-after newborn photographer in Philadelphia. I froze in the middle of unwrapping another gift. You what? Scheduled a portrait session, Diana repeated, oblivious to my tone. Anton usually has a 6-month waiting list. But he's an old friend. Did a beautiful job with James's newborn photos back in the day. I looked to James, whose expression was carefully neutral as he wrote down the silver frame on his list. He'd known about this. Maybe not approved it exactly, but known about it and failed to mention it to me. Diana, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling inside me. James and I haven't discussed newborn photos yet. We might want to wait until the baby is a bit older, or choose a different photographer. Diana laughed as if I'd said something charmingly naive. Oh, Elizabeth, trust me on this. Newborns need to be photographed in the first 10 days to get those adorable sleepy poses. And Anton is the best. He photographed the Reynolds twins last year, and their pictures were featured in Philadelphia Magazine's Most Beautiful Babies spread. I didn't care about Philadelphia Magazine or Society baby photos. I cared about the fact that once again, Diana had made a decision about our child without consulting us. And once again, James was standing silently by, unwilling to contradict his mother in public. We'll discuss it later, I said firmly, aware of the curious glances from guests who had picked up on the tension. There's nothing to discuss, Diana said with a dismissive wave. It's all arranged. My gift to you both. I felt something snap inside me, the last thread of patience I'd been clinging to for months. Diana, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but James and I are the parents. We get to decide when and how our son is photographed, just like we get to decide everything else about his life. A hush fell over the room. Diana's smile froze on her face. Of course you do, dear, she said after a moment, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm just trying to help. First-time mothers are often overwhelmed, and decisions like this can fall through the cracks. My decisions aren't falling through any cracks, I replied, aware that I was making a scene but beyond caring. They're being steamrolled by you. Elizabeth, James murmured in warning, placing a hand on my shoulder. I shook it off, fixing Diana with a steady gaze. Cancel the photographer, Diana. If we want newborn photos, we'll arrange them ourselves. Diana's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before she recovered her society smile. Well, she said brightly, turning to the room at large, pregnancy hormones certainly are something, aren't they, ladies? I remember when I was carrying James, I once burst into tears because Richard brought home the wrong flavour of ice cream. A ripple of polite laughter spread through the room, and Diana used the moment to smoothly transition to the next gift, effectively dismissing my objection while making me look like the irrational one. I sat through the rest of the shower in a fog of hurt and anger, mechanically opening gifts and thanking guests while seething inside. James maintained his careful neutrality, occasionally squeezing my shoulder in what I supposed was meant to be support, but felt more like a warning to keep my emotions in check. Later, as we drove home in tense silence, the car loaded with more baby gifts than we probably had room for, James finally spoke. "You embarrassed my mother in front of all her friends." I stared out the window, watching the affluent suburbs of Philadelphia roll by. "Is that really what you took away from what happened today?" "She was trying to do something nice for us, Liz. For the baby." "No, James. She was trying to control yet another aspect of our child's life. And you let her. Again." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. What was I supposed to do? 'Cause a scene in the middle of the shower? I turned to look at him, really look at him, this man I'd married, who I'd thought would always be my partner, my equal, my teammate. "You were supposed to back me up, to stand with your wife instead of enabling your mother's boundary violations." "They're not violations, Liz. They're gestures of love. Mum's just excited. Yes, I know. You've said that about 100 times. But being excited doesn't give her the right to take over our lives, James. And it doesn't excuse you from standing up for us, for our family." We rode the rest of the way home in silence, the gulf between us wider than it had ever been. And as I unpacked the mountain of baby gifts that evening, carefully removing price tags from outfits that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I couldn't shake the feeling that Diana's intrusion into our lives was only going to get worse once our son was actually born. I was right. The weeks leading up to my due date were a blur of doctor's appointments, last-minute nursery preparations, and increasingly frequent visits from Diana. She'd taken to dropping by almost daily, often letting herself in with the emergency key James had given his parents years ago, before we were even married. "Just checking in," she'd say, as if appearing unannounced in my kitchen while I was trying to work from home was perfectly normal behaviour. I was one of the lucky ones whose company allowed remote work for the last month of pregnancy, saving my maternity leave for after the birth. But concentrating on financial projections became nearly impossible with Diana hovering around, rearranging things in the nursery, or offering unsolicited advice about everything from breastfeeding to sleep training. "You really should consider a night nurse for the first few weeks," she told me one afternoon in late June, as the Philadelphia summer heat settled over the city like a wool blanket. James barely slept through the night until he was 4 months old. I was a complete wreck. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been trying to finish a report for the past 2 hours. "We've talked about this, Diana. We're planning to handle the night feedings ourselves." She made a dismissive sound. "That's what I said too, until I was so exhausted I put orange juice in Richard's coffee and tried to mail a letter in the refrigerator. Trust me, Elizabeth, sleep deprivation is no joke." "I'm sure it's not," I agreed, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But James and I have decided to do this our way." Diana perched on the edge of the sofa, her expression shifting to one of exaggerated concern. "Darling, I worry that you don't quite understand what you're in for. A baby changes everything. Your marriage, your body, your sense of self. Nothing will ever be the same." "I know that," I said, though privately I admitted there was probably a lot about motherhood I couldn't fully grasp until I experienced it. "Do you?" Diana pressed. "Because I've noticed you're still planning to go back to work after your maternity leave. And while I admire career women, truly I do, I just don't see how you'll manage it all without significant help." There it was, the real agenda behind today's visit. Diana had made it clear from the beginning that she thought I should quit my job after the baby was born, just as she had done when she had James. Never mind that I loved my work as a financial analyst, or that my salary was essential to our ability to afford our home in this school district. "We'll manage," I said firmly. "Lots of women work and raise children, Diana." "Of course they do," she agreed with false brightness, "and many of them have family nearby to help. Which is why I've been thinking—" I braced myself, somehow knowing what was coming. "What if I moved a bit closer? The Dorchester has some lovely condos available, just 10 minutes from here. I could help with the baby while you're at work, take him for a few hours in the evening so you and James can have some time together. It would be perfect. The Dorchester was one of Philadelphia's most exclusive apartment buildings, with units starting at well over $1 million. Diana had been living in the home she'd shared with Richard in the mainline suburbs, about 40 minutes from our house, a distance I'd come to appreciate as a buffer. "Diana, that's really not necessary," I began. "It's no trouble." She waved away my objection. "I've been thinking of downsizing anyway since your father passed. The house feels so empty now, and the stairs are becoming a bit much for these old knees." At 62, Diana was far from elderly, and I'd seen her play 3 sets of tennis just the weekend before without any apparent knee trouble. "Have you discussed this with James?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her smile told me everything. "He thinks it's a wonderful idea, said it would be a win-win for everyone." Of course he had. In James's mind, having his mother nearby to help with the baby would solve all our problems, allowing me to go back to work without guilt while ensuring his mother remained happy and involved in our lives. The perfect compromise in his view. Except it wasn't a compromise at all. It was a complete capitulation to Diana's desire to insert herself into every aspect of our lives, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the actual problem between us. "We'll have to discuss it further," I said non-committally, turning back to my laptop in hopes she'd take the hint. Diana stood, smoothing her linen pants. "Of course, dear. You think about it. But don't wait too long. Those Dorchester units get snapped up quickly." After she finally left, I sat in the quiet of our living room, one hand resting on my belly where our son kicked and rolled, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding his impending arrival. I needed to talk to James, really talk to him, not just have another circular argument about his mother's behaviour. But when James came home that evening, tired from a long day at the office and preoccupied with a work crisis that had erupted just before he left, it didn't seem like the right time. And then the next day brought more distractions, more excuses to postpone the difficult conversation we needed to have. Until suddenly, there was no more time for talking. I went into labour on July 3rd, 3 days before my due date. It started in the early morning hours, a persistent backache that gradually intensified until I couldn't deny what was happening. I woke James at 4 a.m., my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. "It's time," I told him, watching his face transform from sleepy confusion to alert joy in the span of seconds. "You're sure?" he asked, already reaching for the hospital bag we'd packed weeks ago. I nodded, breathing through a contraction that wrapped around my midsection like a vice. "Pretty sure." The next hours passed in a blur of pain, anticipation, and focused determination. We arrived at the hospital just after 5, were checked into labour and delivery by 6, and settled into the rhythms of active labour as the summer sun climbed higher in the Philadelphia sky. My doctor had warned me that first babies often take their time, but our son seemed intent on making his entrance into the world as quickly as possible. By noon, I was fully dilated and ready to push. "You're doing amazing, Liz," James murmured, his face close to mine as I gripped his hand through another contraction. Despite everything, the tension, the arguments, Diana's constant presence in our lives, in this moment we were united, focused entirely on bringing our child safely into the world. I had just settled into position to begin pushing when a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. Raised voices, a nurse's firm but polite objection, and then, unmistakably, Diana's commanding tone. "I'm family," she was insisting, "the grandmother. I have every right to be here." James and I exchanged a look of shared horror. "She wouldn't," I whispered, though we both knew she absolutely would. "I'll handle this," James said, squeezing my hand before stepping out into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Through the haze of pain and focused breathing, I could hear their muffled voices, Diana's insistent, James's lowered but firm. The conversation lasted through 2 more contractions, my nurse eyeing the door with professional concern. "Everything okay?" she asked, checking the fetal monitor. "Family drama," I managed between breaths. "Mother-in-law." The nurse's knowing look told me this wasn't the first time she'd seen this particular scenario play out in the delivery room. "Don't worry," she assured me. "Hospital policy is very clear on who's allowed in the room. Only the people you want." James returned moments later, his face flushed with what I recognised as a rare display of anger. "She's gone," he said, taking his place beside me again. "I'm so sorry, Liz. I don't know what she was thinking." I didn't have time to respond before another contraction demanded my full attention. And then it was time to push, the world narrowing to the Herculean task of bringing our son into the world. At 2:17 p.m. on July 3rd, 2023, Richard James Williams II was born. 8 pounds, 4 ounces of perfection with a full head of dark hair and his father's cleft chin. As the doctor placed him on my chest, still slippery and wailing his displeasure at the bright, cold world, all the tension and drama of the past month seemed to evaporate. "He's beautiful," James whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he stroked our son's tiny head with a reverent finger. "You're both so beautiful." We'd agreed on the name weeks ago after much discussion. Richard for James's father, James for my husband. Not the original Richard James Williams III that Diana had repeatedly suggested. Acting as though it was already decided, but our own variation that honoured family while still being our son's own name. The first hour after birth passed in a dreamlike state of wonder as we counted fingers and toes, marvelled at impossibly tiny fingernails, and took turns holding our miracle. The world outside our hospital room ceased to exist. No work stress. No mother-in-law drama, just the three of us forming our new family unit. But reality, in the form of Diana Williams, was waiting just beyond the door. "She's in the waiting room," the nurse informed us gently when it was time to move to the recovery suite, along with a few other family members. "They're asking when they can see the baby." Other family members, my parents who had driven up from Virginia as soon as James called them, James's sister Emily and her husband from Chicago, perhaps a few close friends. All people I would be happy to see, to share our joy with. And Diana. I looked at James, cradling our son with such tenderness it made my heart ache. "I need some time," I told him. "Just us, for a little while longer." He nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I'll tell them to come back this evening." "All of them?" I asked, the question heavy with meaning. James met my eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw real understanding there. "All of them," he confirmed. "Even my mother." He handed our son back to me carefully before stepping out to deliver the message. I heard no raised voices this time, no argument from the hallway. When James returned, his expression was calm but resolute. "They understand," he said simply. "They'll come back at 7. The next few hours were precious beyond measure, quiet moments of bonding with our newborn, learning the basics of breastfeeding with the lactation consultant, napping together as a family of 3. James proved himself a natural father, changing our son's first diaper with more confidence than I expected, swaddling him in the hospital blanket with careful precision. "I've been watching YouTube tutorials," he admitted when I commented on his skill, "while you were sleeping these past few weeks." It was these small moments of preparation, of commitment to fatherhood, that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with James to begin with. Beyond Diana's influence, beyond his reluctance to set boundaries, he was a good man who wanted to be a good father. At 7 o'clock, our peaceful bubble expanded to include family. My parents arrived first, my mother's eyes filling with tears as she held her first grandchild. My father, typically stoic, became uncharacteristically emotional, his large hand looking impossibly huge against our son's tiny body. James's sister Emily was next, her husband trailing behind with an enormous teddy bear and a balloon bouquet. "He looks just like you did as a baby," she told James, examining our son's features with wonder. And then Diana arrived. She swept into the room like visiting royalty, dressed as though for a luncheon at the country club, rather than a hospital visit, carrying a gift bag from an expensive boutique and a professional-looking camera. "There he is!" she exclaimed, making a beeline for the baby in my mother's arms. My beautiful grandson. My mother, to her credit, didn't immediately relinquish the baby. Instead, she looked to me for permission, a small act of respect that spoke volumes. I nodded slightly, and Mum carefully transferred Richard to Diana's waiting arms. "Oh, James," Diana breathed, studying the baby's face. "He looks just like you did. The Williams chin, the Williams nose. Perfect in every way." I bit back the urge to point out that our son had my eyes, my mouth, my dark hair, that he was a blend of both our families, not just a Williams replica. But this wasn't the time for another confrontation. Diana settled into the visitor's chair, clearly planning to monopolise her grandson for as long as possible. "I've brought Anton's card," she said, nodding toward the gift bag she'd set down. "He can come to the house next week for the newborn photos. I've already paid the deposit." I felt James tense beside me. Here it was, the first test of whether anything had really changed. "Mum," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "Liz and I talked about this. We're going to wait on professional photos for now." Diana looked up, surprise evident on her face. "But darling, I've already arranged everything. Anton had to move heaven and earth to fit us in next week." "Then I guess you'll need to call and cancel," James replied. Still gentle but unwavering. "We appreciate the thought, but we want some time to settle in as a family before we worry about photo sessions." Diana's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, hurt, and barely concealed anger. "I was only trying to help," she said, her voice taking on the wounded tone that had so often resulted in James backing down in the past. But not this time. "I know you were," he said, "and we're grateful for your support. But Liz and I need to make these decisions together, as Richard's parents." The room had gone uncomfortably quiet, everyone aware of the undercurrent of tension. My father, never one for awkward social situations, suddenly developed an intense interest in the hospital room's view of the Philadelphia skyline. Diana held our son a moment longer, her face a careful mask, before standing and passing him to James. "Well," she said briskly, "I suppose I should let you all rest. It's been quite a day." She collected her purse and the gift bag, pausing at the door. "I'll stop by the house tomorrow to check on you. I can bring dinner. You'll be much too tired to cook." It wasn't a question or an offer, it was a statement of what would happen. Diana's way of reasserting control even as she retreated from this particular battle. "Actually, Mum," James said, cradling our son against his chest, "we'd like a few days to ourselves when we get home, just to adjust to our new routine." Diana froze, one manicured hand on the door handle. "A few days?" "Yes," James nodded. "We'll call you when we're ready for visitors." The look Diana gave me then, sharp, accusatory, filled with barely concealed resentment, told me exactly who she blamed for this new boundary. Not her beloved son, but me, the interloper who had stolen him away and was now keeping her from her grandson. "I see," she said coldly. "Well, call me when you're ready." After she left, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Emily, who had witnessed the exchange with poorly disguised fascination, let out a low whistle. "Well, that was something," she murmured. "I don't think I've ever seen James stand up to Mum like that." James busied himself returning our son to the bassinet, avoiding everyone's eyes. But I had seen what that small act of defiance had cost him, the genuine pain of disappointing his mother, mixed with the resolution of doing what he knew was right for our family. It was a start. A small one, perhaps, but significant. The next day, we brought our son home to the house we'd prepared so carefully for his arrival. The nursery, painted in the soft navy blue James had suggested months ago, was ready with the crib we'd chosen together, not Diana's imported Italian one, but a simple modern design that converted to a toddler bed for future use. For 3 blissful days, we existed in a newborn bubble of around-the-clock feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of sleep. James took 2 weeks of paternity leave, throwing himself fully into fatherhood with a dedication that made me fall in love with him all over again. True to his word, he didn't invite his mother over during those first days, though she called multiple times daily for updates and sent a daily delivery of meals from expensive restaurants, despite our protests that we were well stocked with food. On the fourth day, when James finally agreed she could visit, Diana arrived with a car full of packages and a face set in wounded martyrdom. "I wasn't sure what you needed," she explained, as James helped her carry in bags from high-end baby boutiques. "So I got everything: clothes, blankets, toys, books. Oh, and this monitoring system. It tracks the baby's breathing, heart rate, everything. Top of the line." "Mum, we already have a monitor," James said, gesturing to the simple video unit we'd set up between the nursery and our bedroom. Diana gave the device a dismissive glance. "That's just video and audio. This one has medical-grade sensors. So much safer." I watched from the doorway, our son sleeping peacefully against my shoulder as Diana unpacked her purchases, each one a not-so-subtle criticism of our preparations, each one implying we weren't doing enough to protect or provide for our child. "Can I hold him now?" she asked finally, having arranged her gifts around the living room like offerings at an altar. I hesitated only briefly before carefully transferring Richard to her waiting arms. Diana's entire demeanour transformed as she cradled him, her face softening into genuine adoration. "There's my precious boy," she cooed, sinking into the rocking chair by the window. "Grandmother's perfect little prince." James caught my eye over his mother's head, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. Diana loved our son, fiercely, genuinely. That wasn't in question. The problem had never been a lack of love, but rather how that love manifested in controlling, boundary-violating ways. For the next hour, Diana held court in our living room, barely allowing James or me to hold our own child. She had opinions on everything: how we were swaddling him, too loose; the room temperature, too warm; the pacifier we'd chosen, the wrong shape for proper oral development. When Richard began to fuss, clearly hungry, Diana initially resisted my attempt to take him back for feeding. "I can give him a bottle," she suggested, though we'd told her repeatedly that I was exclusively breastfeeding for now. "I brought some premium formula just in case. Much more convenient. And then James can help with feedings too." "Mum," James said firmly, "Liz is breastfeeding. We've discussed this." Diana reluctantly surrendered the baby, a slight frown creasing her perfectly made-up face. "Well, at least consider pumping so others can feed him occasionally. It's not healthy for the mother to be the only one who can soothe the baby." I bit my tongue as I settled into the nursery glider to feed our son, choosing not to engage with Diana's thinly veiled criticism. These early days of motherhood were challenging enough without adding mother-in-law drama to the mix. When James showed Diana out an hour later, I could hear her in the hallway, already planning her next visit. "I'll come by tomorrow around 11, she was saying. "I can watch the baby while you both take a nap. New parents need their rest." "Mum," James replied, his voice gentle but firm. "We appreciate the offer, but we're still finding our rhythm as a family. How about you come for dinner this weekend instead? Saturday at 6. There was a pause, and I could imagine Diana's expression, the hurt, the manipulation, the silent accusation. "Saturday is 3 days away, James. The baby will have changed so much by then." 3 days isn't that long, Mum. And we'll send pictures, I promise." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Is this Elizabeth's idea, keeping me away from my grandson?" I held my breath, waiting for James's response. This was the moment. Would he blame me to keep peace with his mother? Or would he stand firm in our united decision? "No, Mom," he said finally. "It's our decision. Liz and I are Richard's parents, and we need to establish our own routines without too many visitors right now. Even visitors we love." The pride I felt in that moment, hearing James stand up to his mother without throwing me under the bus, was indescribable. Diana left, clearly unhappy but temporarily defeated. And as the weeks of our son's life unfolded, James continued to maintain the boundaries we'd established together, limiting Diana's visits to scheduled times, gently but firmly countering her more outrageous suggestions, and most importantly, presenting a united front with me on all parenting decisions. It wasn't perfect. Diana still pushed boundaries whenever possible, still brought unwanted gifts with strings attached, still made comments that undermined my confidence as a mother. But something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. James had finally recognised that his primary loyalty needed to be to the family we'd created together, not to the mother who had raised him. The real test came in late August, when Diana raised the subject of her potential move to the Dorchester again. "I've put a deposit down on a unit," she announced during a Sunday dinner at our house, as casually as if discussing the weather. "2 bedrooms, stunning views of the city. They're holding it for me until the end of the month." James and I exchanged glances across the table. We'd discussed this possibility extensively during the quiet hours of night feedings, reaching a consensus about where we stood. "Mum," James said carefully, setting down his fork, "we've talked about this, and while we appreciate your desire to be close by, we think it's best if you stay in your current home for now." Diana's smile froze. "But I thought we agreed this would be for the best. I could help with the baby when Elizabeth goes back to work. Richard could have his grandmother right nearby. We do want Richard to have a close relationship with you," I added, determined to be part of this conversation. "But we also need to establish ourselves as a family unit, with our own routines and boundaries." "Boundaries," Diana repeated, the word sounding like a foreign concept in her mouth. "You keep using that word, James, as if I'm some sort of intruder in your lives rather than family." "You're absolutely family, Mum," James said gently. "An important part of our lives and Richard's life, but being family doesn't mean there are no boundaries. It means respecting each other's space and decisions." Diana set down her napkin with deliberate care. "I see. And my decision to move closer to my only grandchild isn't respected because it feels like an attempt to insert yourself into our daily lives in a way that isn't healthy for any of us," James replied, his voice still kind but unwavering. "I love you, Mum. Richard loves you. But we need some distance to grow as a family." The hurt in Diana's eyes was real, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Despite her controlling tendencies, her love for her son and grandson was genuine. She simply didn't know how to express that love without taking over. "Fine," she said finally, her voice brittle. "I'll cancel the deposit, but don't come crying to me when you're overwhelmed and need help." "We won't," James assured her, "but we will invite you for regular visits, video calls, and all the important moments in Richard's life. You're his grandmother, and that's a special relationship we want to nurture, in a way that works for everyone." Diana didn't stay much longer that evening, claiming a headache that required her to lie down in her own bed. As James walked her to the door, I cleaned up the dinner dishes, listening for raised voices or signs that he had capitulated to her emotional manipulation. But when he returned to the kitchen, his expression was weary but resolved. "She's upset," he said simply, picking up a dish towel to help dry. "But she'll adjust." I leaned against the counter, studying this man who had grown so much in the weeks since our son's birth. "You're a good son, James. And an even better father and husband." He set down the plate he'd been drying and pulled me into his arms. "I'm trying to be. It's not easy, balancing everyone's needs. But I know where my priorities lie now." Over the bassinet monitor, we could hear Richard beginning to stir, the small snuffling sounds that usually preceded his demand for an evening feeding. The sound of our son, our miracle, our future, reinforced everything we'd been working toward. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I whispered against James's chest. He kissed the top of my head. "More than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." And as we headed upstairs together to tend to our son, I believed him. The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Diana would test boundaries, make comments, attempt to reassert control in 100 small ways. There would be holidays and birthdays and countless occasions where family dynamics would strain and stretch our resolve. But something essential had changed. James had found his voice as a husband and father. I had found my confidence as a mother. And together, we had begun to establish the kind of family we wanted for our son, one built on mutual respect, clear communication, and boundaries that protected rather than divided. Diana would always be Richard's grandmother, always be an important part of his life. But she would no longer be the one who dictated the terms of our family's existence. That right belonged to us, the parents who had created this new life together, who would guide him through the world with love and wisdom, and the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the most important boundaries are the ones we set with those we love the most. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.